tarmac for a while in Ottawa. I flew out of Ottawa yesterday, and my flight went well, but I gather the weather got bad, so I really appreciate you doing this. I'm going to tell the people two stories about you and me. John, I think, I haven't checked this historically. I've got some of my students who know I like to cross-check my data. But Don was an embedded reporter in the 1967 National Leadership Convention in Canada. And I don't know if the term embedded reporter had even been invented then. But we had a private jet. We flew across Canada from St. John's, Newfoundland to Victoria, British Columbia. In addition to the candidate whose name was Duff Robin, there was Don, a chap named Harry Martin, and myself. And let me tell you, when you're flying 35,000 feet in a private jet, looking down where the three Great Lakes join Superior, Michigan, and Huron, you get a sense that you're really important, even though you're not. But it was a wonderful experience, and Don did a great job. And then, the other thing, I recall visiting Don on my first visit to Washington. And what I remember about that, in addition to having a very nice time with Don, was the time of Watergate. And I'd never been to Washington. And I took a taxi to the airport the next morning. And I said, look, I don't have a lot of time, but I'd like to see some of the sights. And in spite of the fact it was Watergate, it was very early in the morning. There were huge lines to go through the White House. But Don has been there. He was there when the Nixon years, and he's reported ever since. I think it's incredible that we'd be able to get him to speak to us. Really great privilege, and thank you very much for coming.
Thank you, Joe. It's always nice to do any kind of event or anything with Joe, and he offered me this opportunity. I seized it as quickly as I could. I have to tell one story that I'd forgotten. I think it's in the book, but when we were traveling around with Duff Robin, and I was working at the Winnipeg Review, and I was the legislative reporter, and I was really a seasoned, grizzled veteran. I was, I think, 25 or 6 years old, so I was really, but that's the way it worked at the Winnipeg Review, and it was a kind of good place to work because you could get a lot of experience when you were quite young. Anyway, Joe was a couple years older than me, and then Duff was about 50, and Harry Martin, I think, was even older. Anyway, so there was like the boys, the kids section of the plane, and then the serious people section. We came to Toronto during the CNE exhibition, and Mr. Rodlin had been engaged to be, as part of his campaign, the speaker at the automotive building. And I don't know who he was speaking to, but anyway, it was during the exhibition. And we got off the plane at the airport, which was then called Malta, now called Pearson, and we got out in the private plane section, and there were two limousines there. And you remember this? There were two limousines there, and so Duff and Harry, and someone met Duff, or 2 or 3 people met Duff. They went in one limousine, and Joe and I jumped in the other limousine. And for some reason, the driver took off first. And so we're riding along, we're thinking this is pretty snazzy, riding along the limousine. We are on the QEW, we're coming downtown, and we turn off to go into the exhibition, and as we get to the gate of the exhibition, there's a motorcycle escort of policemen, and they see the limousine coming, and they jump on their motorcycles, and they rev it up, and they start leading us up through the CNE, and people are partying, and they're looking, who are these? And I say, oh, gee, this is awful, because when Roblin gets in his limousine, he's 3 minutes behind, there'll be no motorcycle, there'll be no path cleared, and he'll be in a hell of a pickle, and Joe and I'll be up at the end. Joe is not at all concerned. He doesn't care. He's Roblin's executive assistant. You'd think he might be a little concerned. He's out the he's looking out the window. People are waving back. Oh, where's that young man? Oh, gee, maybe he's Kennedy. You know. We finally get up to the automotive building, and the motorcade whooshes us around, and we get out, and the motorcycles have all ended up in a row, and all of the policemen have gotten off, and the sergeant who's in charge of it is standing in front of us, and he takes off his helmet and he salutes, and so we said, thank you, Sergeant, that's very nice, and we shook his hand. And then we ran like hell inside the building before Duff Romney got there and said, what were you doing with my motorcycle escort? Now that, only you could wait. Hello. Do you still do that as you drive around Toronto? And there's still motorcycle escorts when you arrive. So I think that story is in the book. But anyway, Joe's always very kind about my book, and it is about me, but it's also about Joe. So I find that if you're going to write a book and you want it talked up, the more people you actually mention in it, as long as you don't say they should be in jail or they were something or other, then then they'll talk up your book for you. And here's the living example right now, and you saw what happened there. I was in Washington. I first went to Washington in the Watergate years, and I lived there all of the 70s, and I've been going back ever since. And now I'm involved with the Canada Institute of the Wilson Center in Washington. So I still go back, and some of the meetings we have in Montreal or Toronto, and some we have in Washington. But I'm always sort of up to date, I hope, with what's going on in the United States. Now, I have to thank you because I wrote a column back in August, and I passed it around. I wrote it in August, right after the Republican convention, when I always thought that Trump was a serious candidate. Most people didn't, but I did. I didn't think he was a serious person. I don't think he's a serious man. I don't think there's anything serious about him, but I didn't think he was a serious candidate. And I wrote, after listening to his speech, I wrote the column saying, this is how Trump can win the presidency. All my friends boo-hooed it. In October, when he was about 12 points behind in the polls, I thought, oh God, that was published at the beginning of October. I thought, oh my God, why did I ever write that? But in fact, by the time November came around, it turned out it was right. And what it really says is that Trump's strategy was, when you listen to his speech carefully at the nominating convention, when he accepted the nomination, his speech said, we're going to start making things again in Wisconsin. We're going to start making things again in Illinois. We're going to start making things again in Michigan. We're going to start making things in Pennsylvania. All of those states in 2012 had gone for Barack Obama. And some of them usually went Democrat. It didn't matter, you could run a spotted dog and they would go Democrat. But he saw, and I guess from maybe his primary campaign, that there was white, blue-collar workers there, many of them unemployed, many of them working in service industry jobs where they used to get $40 an hour at Caterpillar or somewhere, and that they were mad as hell, and they weren't going to take it anymore, as the old saying went from the movie in the 70s. And I thought at the time, if you can do that, and if you take those out of those states' electoral votes out of the Democratic column and put them in the Republican column, Mitt Romney would have won the election in 2012. And so I just transposed them, and I said, if this is what he can do, he's going to win, and Hillary is not going to be the first woman to be president of the United States. And sure enough, he did it in all the states, except Illinois. And that is why he is today the president of the United States. And that is why when I suddenly realized, when you asked me, did I predict this, I thought, my God, I can tell you that story, but if I actually hand out the copies of the column that I wrote, then you'll know that I actually did predict it. So now, if you ask me, Hal, did you make a lot of money betting on that? I'd have to say, no, I didn't. I wasn't that confident of it. But I knew that that was his strategy, and I knew that if he could do it, he would win. And he, it's kind of like My Fair Lady. He said that he would do it, and indeed he did, and he is going to be the President of the United States. Now, Joe said to me when he first said, he said, you know, you covered a lot of elections, maybe there'll be something funny in this election, and you can talk about that. And I have a feeling after thinking about the results, Custer apparently said to his lieutenant as he looked at the Sioux as they were coming over the mountain towards him, and he realized he was terribly outnumbered, he apparently said, nothing good is going to come of this. And I have a feeling when I looked at the election results the same way, and when Joe asked me, well, maybe we could say something funny, I thought about it, and then I thought of what Adlai Stevenson said in 1952, when he lost the presidency to Dwight Eisenhower. He said, "This hurts too much to laugh, but I'm too old to cry." And that's the way I feel. I mean, I do not think there's anything good that is going to come of the Donald Trump presidency. I can't think of any area where something positive is likely to come out of it. I think that the United States has lost its way. It has lost its way in on a number of different levels and a number of different groups. And some groups, having lost their way, have contributed to the other groups losing their way. And so politics in the United States, partly because of social media, partly because of the way cable television in the United States has changed and is really now just sort of a hectoring, partisan series of stations that reinforce the prejudices of the people who are watching them, rather than trying to in any way report the news in a kind of rational and complete way. And so it's just an extension of the internet. The internet allowed people to get news and read opinions that they agreed with. And you didn't have to read anything that you didn't agree with. You didn't waste time. You just went on and in fact, when you read the first thing that you agreed with, there was then, you could click on other icons on the article, and you'd read other articles that basically said the same thing. So you would have this multiplying effect. Well, Fox News on the right and MSNBC on the left work that way as television in the United States. You listen to Chris Matthews in the United States on MSNBC, I don't know why he has guests. Because he asks them a question and then they say, and he jumps in and he's given the answer or his opinion before, sometimes they'll say, well, Chris, and then it's all over. And only on CNN do they seem to try and at least balance it off. But, they don't have as good ratings as the others because people would rather have their prejudices reinforced. A person who reinforces your prejudices is a genius, right? I mean, they agree with you, they're a genius. And so now in the United States particularly, there's this kind of self-identifying geniuses all over the place saying all sorts of crazy things. The other thing about it is that Donald Trump is going to be the president of the United States. He is ignorant. He is a misogynist. He is a bully. He has no experience in public policy. He doesn't understand macroeconomics, never mind microeconomics. He doesn't understand defense policy. He's never had to consider anything about it. And he has a very short attention span and a very big ego, which is an awful combination. It'd be better to have a small ego and a big attention span, but he has them in reverse. And how that is going to lead to anything good, it seems to me very hard to fathom. Most of his public policy pronouncements during the election campaign were either bizarre or impossible to do, but he said them in a way that he thought would convince people, particularly people who were not too well informed, and he was right. And someone said to me, and so this isn't an original idea, but he said, Donald Trump at one time, because he owns beauty pageants, he owns hotels, he puts his name on everything he can. He also owned professional wrestling, the WWF, I think it's called, and he owned that. And so that's wrestling on TV, which has about as much to do with real wrestling as, I don't know, me singing has to do with Frank Sinatra. But he WWF wrestling, there's a hero and there's a villain. And the hero gets beaten up by the villain and beaten up, and the crowd boo and they yell at the villain, and the villain goes around and taunts the crowd. And then finally the hero perseveres at the end and he defeats the villain, and everybody cheers and goes home happy. Well, basically, when you think about the election campaign, Trump cast himself as the hero. And Crooked Hillary was the villain, and before it was Crooked Hillary, it was Stupid Jeb, and before that it was Little Marco, and before that, you know, anything rude he could say about people who were supposedly more qualified than him, he made them into the villains, and he made himself into the hero. And sure enough, as it went along, he started triumphing, until at the end, on November the 8th, he won it all. And so now we have sort of a reality TV show hero, and again, reality TV is like wrestling on TV. There's nothing real about it. Right? Reality TV is the most misnamed thing you could imagine. There's no reality to it. They shoot it take after take until they get it the way they want it. Then they edit it together and they look like they're having a race. Actually, you know, they're sitting around drinking coffee until they're called to do their little bit. So we have a reality show president who really doesn't have anything to do with public policy or being president or being really a Republican, and he's going to be the president of the United States for at least 4 years, unless he gets impeached, which I don't think he will, even though he will probably give lots of reason to be impeached. But because he is at least nominally a Republican, and since the Republicans control the House of Representatives, and since it is the Judiciary Committee in the House of Representatives that has to vote for impeachment before the full House votes for it, and I don't think they're going to impeach one of their own, or one of that they kind of pretend is their own, unless, you know, he were caught murdering someone, which, well, he's not too smart, he's kind of really clever, and so I think that he won't probably do that. So we're stuck with him, and we're going to see what he does. Now, it's always dangerous, even in Canada, after an election when the government changes particularly, and even though you've followed what was in their platform, when people say, well, now what's going to happen? And you say, well, I guess they're going to try and do some of the things that were in their platform. And yeah, but what's going to happen? Well, you know, you'll have to watch over the next few years to really see what's going to happen. Plus, the thing that in politics always at the end shapes whether people are good leaders or bad leaders or governments are successful or not, is what Harold Macmillan told an interviewer when he was retiring as Prime Minister of Britain in 1963. He was speaking at Oxford, actually, and he wasn't being interviewed, and some young student got up and he said, excuse me, Prime Minister, he said, would you tell us, please, what was the most trying thing during your term in office? And Macmillan looked at me and said, events, dear boy, events, dear boy. And the fact is that events will always, and it's usually how you handle events that show how good you are. Because, you know, if you plan things out and plot things out, as long as you have some sense of execution or someone to help you execute it, you don't even have to really be that good at it yourself. You know, it's going to more or less turn out the way you'd hope. But when you have to kind of wing it, and you have to call on your resources, you have to call on your brains, you have to call on your guts, and you have to call on your ability to draw people together. That's when you have it shows what the person is made of. I'm afraid. I mean, it seems to me, and this is really, it's not hypocritical, but I don't have any evidence to back it up except which is sort of common knowledge, is that any time Trump has really gotten into a difficult position, he either sues the person or declares bankruptcy. And that doesn't sound to me, like, I know bankruptcy is a legitimate business technique, and I know that there are times when to do anything else would be crazy, but I think to be a serial bankruptcy, it seems to me, I don't know, Helen, you know a lot more about this than me, but that doesn't seem to me attractive anyway about a person, and I would think that his main approach so far when he's been in trouble has been to cut and run, and that's not very good for the President of the United States. Now, what does this mean to Canada? Well, in the big picture, it means that the world is going to be a lot more unstable than it's been. There has been, I think, since the Second World War, anyway, in the United States, kind of a general consensus that the United States had a role to play, and basically was the leader of the free world. It was the leader militarily, it was the leader economically. It encouraged trade deals that were always advantageous to the United States. The idea that Trump's an American firster, and that's a difference, is not accurate. Every president of the United States is an American firster. Sometimes, though, by being an American firster, you may say, well, actually, if Japan were stronger economically, that would actually be very good for America. So, as an American firster, I'm going to encourage Japan to be stronger economically, and I'm going to cut them some slack on trade deals, or I'm going to. So, a more sophisticated person may apply America first in a more sophisticated way. Trump is, it's America first, and if you're not American, well, the hell with you. And a lot of that, I think, is going to create instability in the world. It's going to create opportunities, particularly for the Chinese. The Russians will try and exploit it, but my view is that Russia is really more or less a spent force, and as long as the price of oil is under about $85 a barrel, Russia is going to be a lot of not much capital, as they say, it's not going to be it. But China is a really serious problem, and I think when you start manufacturing islands in the middle of the South China Sea, so you can use them as military bases, you're serious. You're not just kind of sailing around going hello. You're serious, and I think that Trump doesn't understand the TPP, which is now not going to go ahead, and which wasn't really all that economically important to the United States or Canada. But it was all about getting all of China's neighbors into an association, and there was one person missing. Who was that? Oh, it was China. In other words, make the rules. Maybe at some point let China in when all the rules are made, but first you have the rules in place, and you have the other countries around China dependent on the United States essentially for the leadership. And now looks like he's thrown it out the window. It's not going to come back. So that's the problem. He is opposed to the Iran deal. Well, the Iran deal is done. Even if he tries to somehow pull the United States out of it, the Europeans, the Russians, and the Chinese have made the deal with Iran, and they like the deal with Iran, and they're not going to let it out. They're going to keep it going. They're not going to you can't put that genie back in the bottle. And the other thing is that, he made a big thing about how we, the Americans, gave the Iranians all this money. Well, they were given a lot of money. It was actually their money originally. It was money, a lot of it had been held since 1979 when the Ayatollah grabbed the Americans in the embassy. But that money's gone back, so there's really no pressure on the Iranians. And if the Americans were to say, well, as far as we're concerned, the deal is null and void, the Iranians would, I think, be tempted to say, good, let's start spinning those nuclear reactors again and enriching uranium. Because, if he does that, it's the worst possible thing he can do, even if he thinks the original deal is stupid. And I don't know enough of it. I don't think it's stupid. I think even if it delays for 15 years, nuclear progress in Iran on nuclear weapons progress, that's 15 years where there could be political changes in Iran, there could be all sorts of different equations that will come into play. And if none of that happens, who still has 15 years, they're still 15 years behind where they were. So I don't think that's the bad deal he thinks it is. Now, he says he wants to either renegotiate or tear up NAFTA, which is something that is really important to Canada. Whether or not he will really try and do that, unclear. But what he has done, so he does have some kind of a plan. He has arranged in the first 100 days of his presidency, which would be take to about May the 1st, somewhere around there. He has asked his incoming commerce and trade people to prepare all of his options on that. What can be done about that? And then in the next 100 days, so that would be 200 days, which by then would be around September the 1st of next year, he, the great decider, is going to decide what to do about that. So we've got 200 days after he becomes president to convince him and convince Americans to convince him that tearing up NAFTA is very harmful to the United States, not by Canada. You know, if you said, you know, Mr. President, this would be very hard on Canada, he'd say, no, well, that's pretty tough, you know, too bad. I don't care about Canada. But if you say, well, actually, there are 35 states in the United States whose principal trading partner is some part of Canada. If you say there are 9 million jobs in the United States that are directly tied to NAFTA, then maybe you hear now there hasn't been any country of origin labeling on U.S. meat, which apparently Donald Trump wants to do again. So he wants to fight two things that he's already lost, or the Americans have already lost, every court, either their own or international. If that's the main thing he's going to do about NAFTA, I'm not sure that we have to worry all that much, but it seems to me there's lots of other potential for him to do mischievous things. The other thing he's going to do, of course, is, and this is reflected in a way in the announcement from Ottawa this week, the Americans are going to come hard at us again at not spending enough on defense. Now, Gordon Giffen told me not too long ago, he was Clinton's second ambassador in Ottawa, and he went apparently to see Paul Martin when he was ambassador, and Paul Martin was finance minister, and they were quite good friends actually. Giffen had a lot of friends, still has in Ottawa. And Gordon told me, he said, I went to see Paul, and I said, now, you know, Paul, you're just not spending enough on defense. Instead of 2% of GDP, you're spending like 0.5% on GDP, and that's not good enough. And he said, Paul looked at me, leaned back, and he took off his glasses, and he said, now, Gordon, if you were an ally of the United States located where we are, how much do you think you'd actually spend on defense? And that's the reality, you know, that we're going to be defended by the Americans whether we spend a nickel on defense or not. But, partly because of the screw up over a number of governments, not just the Harper government, over the F-35s, we're now going to buy 18 planes that may be orphans in our fleet forever, you know, just 18 of these Super Hornets. But we're doing that partly because we don't have enough CF-18s left anymore, partly because, sadly, as it happened yesterday, they started to fall out of the sky. They're just so old, you know, and someone got killed on that. So, and you can buy the Hornets, as they're called, virtually off the rack. They've been making them for years. It's not like the F-35, but they don't. We're not sure they really even work. They really have a terrific second, third generation kind of radar and stealth capability, all this, but they may not work, which is what the problem is. But the Hornets work right. So that'll be the other thing that the Americans come at us quickly. But I mean, the overall problem is that the world is going to be more unstable with Donald Trump as president. And as you know, we all live in the world, and we all, you know, I was thinking, you remember this, how, you know, Fidel Castro died, and a lot of people, oh, you know, Cuba was great, and Fidel was cool, and smoked a cigar. I remember the Cuban Missile Crisis. I didn't think Fidel was great. I thought he was a warmonger and maybe going to blow us up. And, you know, I think that that kind of instability with Trump is possible too. If he doesn't understand the nuances the way that he should. And the problem also is, as he's putting together his administration, the only thing that it reminds me of a bit, and this was part of my time in Washington, when Ronald Reagan was elected in 1980, he came to Washington, and people knew who he was. Obviously, they really knew who he was. He'd been in the movies, and then But he had been governor of California for 2 terms. And California is about, in population, the same as Canada. And so we kind of knew he knew how to at least operate in the political system. But he never dealt with international affairs, he never dealt with, all of the kind of macroeconomic and microeconomic problems and the IMF and the World Bank. But he put in his administration, and there were a lot of them around Washington at the time, and they all came from the Nixon-Ford administration. There were a lot of really smart people in Washington, like George Shultz, like Caspar Weinberger, like James Baker, like a number of others, Donald Rumsfeld, who turned out not to be so smart in the end, but in those days seemed pretty smart. And they staffed his administration, and he liked being the actor, and there's a joke that after he retired, he went back to Los Angeles and was standing on the corner, and an old friend came and said, Ronnie, how are you? How's it been going? He said, it's just wonderful. He said, I just finished an 8-year run playing the president in Washington. But at least the guys that were working behind the scenes really knew what they were doing. And the Reagan administration, I think people now look at, and even when it was there, but look at it now as really a successful government, whether or not he always was up on every file. But Trump has not done that. The people that he's been naming so far are kind of also rands and nobodies, and people that seem to share his views and think that they're actually sensible. And so I don't have the same kind of confidence that, plus I don't think Trump just wants to be the figurehead. I think that he actually thinks that he is smart. And I guess if you've got made a few billion, that kind of need to be quite clever. And so I think that I'm worried about it. As Custer said, I can't see anything good coming of this. And, the sewer up there on the hill, and we're down here in the bottom, and I don't think it's going to go very well. So having now really increased your enthusiasm for the Trump administration and made you happy and confident, I hope you've got some questions, because I can't think of anything more to depress you if you don't.
Excellent.